In today's video, I wanted to go through and discuss all of the side quests featured in Morrowind's Bloodmoon expansion. This video is a compilation and chunks some of the quests together. To begin, let's go over 3 missions: the Moon Sugar Mystery, the Missing Missionary, and the Sad Seer. 2 of them are given to the player directly out of Fort Frostmoth, and the third could be found more in the wilderness. I'm going to play through all of them, detail my personal experiences, and then at the end of each one, I'll talk a little bit about possible lore, missing facts, Easter eggs, or theories that are present. As per usual, the facts and information provided are brought to you by the game itself and the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages. Starting off the quests today is my favorite, the Moon Sugar Mystery. This one starts with the player locating the guard, Severia Gradius, out of Fort Frostmoth. Chatting with her, she mentions that our conversation has to be brief, as she's quite busy with some moon sugar investigation. Inquiring about it, Gradius says that I probably haven't heard anything because I'm new around here. However, for the last few months, people on Solstheim have been getting poisoned. Someone's been slipping moon sugar into their food and drink. They experience a high like no other, and then crash really hard, sometimes resulting in death. Severia's current duties are to find the person responsible and deliver justice. She goes into detail how just recently, the cult priest, Jeline, was the latest victim. The Empire didn't really care much for the matter up until one of their own was affected. Gradius asks for my help in finding who's responsible, as she's rather busy with her other duties around the fort. Agreeing to help her, my task is to find the man and execute him. During Jeline's trip, he caught a brief visual of the poisoner. All he could really remember though is that the person was wearing a unique white Colovian fur helm. Severia wants me to bring her the helm as proof that the matter has been wrapped up. Exiting the conversation, I wanted to go and have a chat with Jeline, just in case there was any further information he could offer me on the search. The Red Guard ended up sharing his experience, and honestly, the story is pretty unnerving. After cult services, he went for a sip of wine. Shortly after, he experienced an extremely euphoric trip, citing that he's never felt so free in his entire life. And then, the crash came. As Jeline was fading off, he ended up seeing the culprit, a frail old man. He was strange looking and not quite a Nord. The man was wearing the Colovian fur helm and singing a song. Going further into detail, Jeline describes the song as one you might sing to a child, almost like a nursery rhyme. He remembers hearing about a workshop in the snow, lanterns aglow, candy, and then a lot of laughter. That's about all the information I got, and now it's time to begin my search. The only clues I really have are a workshop in the snow and possibly glowing lanterns. If you really didn't know where to look, it honestly might take you a little bit to find the point of interest. There's a lot of ground to cover, and the workshop could be literally anything. From my experience, I actually happened across the culprit's base while embarking on the main questline. I was rather confused with the setup and decided it best to leave everything alone for the time being. However, I'm fairly confident that the shack in the woods is my desired destination. Uncle Sweetshare's workshop is located south of Lake Fjelding on the eastern side of the island. Upon getting close, you'll probably spot a dead Khajiit off to the side of the cabin. The Khajiit's name is Minashi, and looking at the corpse, you'll find some moon sugar as well as the song of Uncle Sweetshare. The song mentions the workshop, candy, lanterns, and includes lots of laughter. Readying myself, I went on inside of the shack.
Candy, candy, he makes so much. Uncle Sweetshare has a magic touch. So it's back to the workshop in the snow, with lovely lanterns all aglow. Hee-hee, ha-ho, hee-hee-hee, ha-ha-ho.
At the moment, Uncle Sweetshare isn't hostile, so now's your chance to talk with him and see what's exactly going on. Uncle comments on how there's a visitor in the shop and calls out my character by their name. He says he has candy treats to spare if I need happiness. Sweetshare then realizes that I'm here on official Empire business and laughs it off. Discussing his treats first, he talks about how his candy is filled with sugar and love. His aim is to bring happiness to the people of Solstheim. It's apparently hard work, but very fulfilling. He then comments that Minashi once thought the same as well. Bringing up the Khajiit, Uncle mentions that he was his assistant, but unfortunately, quote-unquote, overdosed on moon sugar. That's why his corpse is outside, as Sweetshare attempted to bury him. Switching over to the moon sugar investigation, Uncle reveals his motives. He calls Severia grumpy and says that he should visit her next, as that's what his work is all about. Sweetshare visits those who are sad, down, or depressed, and then lifts them back up by spiking their provisions with moon sugar. That's apparently what he did with Jeline, as Uncle reveals that the Redguard's true love has disappeared and that he hasn't been the same since. Finally, when confronted, Sweetshare says that he copied a nursery rhyme and took on the very same identity. This line of work is his calling. It fulfills him, and it's how he spreads his cheer throughout the land. It's now time to pass a judgment on the crazed man. You can either execute him or cut a deal with Sweetshare. Take his helm, spare his life, and in exchange, he stops poisoning people. Trying the hard way first, Uncle Sweetshare is a level 25 Nord alchemist. He fights using spells and wields a wooden staff. Ultimately though, he doesn't have much in the way of offense, and the fight isn't super tricky. On his body, you'll find another one of his songs, some moon sugar, the white fur helm, and perhaps most notably, a Grandmaster mortar and pestle. Beyond some other alchemical supplies, there isn't much else to find in here. When wrapped up, you can return to Gradius with the helm in hand. Now, reverting back and choosing to spare the crazed Nord, he doesn't like the deal that you offer him at first. However, through some laughs and inner reflection, he realizes that he likes living more than he likes handing out candy and spreading joy. So he hands me his fur helm, and then we go our separate ways. Either method gets you the headpiece, and for my canon playthrough, I let Sweetshare live. I find him way too interesting of a character, and frankly, Solstheim needs all the personality that it can get. Returning to Severia and speaking with her, she seems pretty surprised that I was able to come back with the Colovian fur helm. She recognizes that justice has been delivered, or so she thinks, and calls it a great service to her and the Empire. As a token of her appreciation, I'm handed 1500 gold as well as Severia's Imperial Shortsword. Taking a look, the sword has the enchantment of Rally Humanoid for 1 to 10 points for 30 seconds in 10 feet, as well as Fortify Personality for 1 to 10 points for 30 seconds. Unfortunately, it's not a weapon my character is proficient with, but it's a neat blade nonetheless. With that, thus ends the quest, the Moon Sugar Mystery. When I first encountered Uncle Sweetshare's shop out in the middle of the woods, I knew whatever quest it was tied to was going to be excellent. A dead Khajiit outside, a weird man singing strange songs inside, and the name, Uncle Sweetshare, just leaves a bad taste in one's mouth. A crazed man poisoning the locals, all in order to make them happier, is quite the intriguing tale. Jeline's visual of helplessly drifting off while an old man sings nursery rhymes in front of him is simply unsettling, even in a video game. Like mentioned before, if you had never come across Sweetshare's cabin, it would have taken you some time to find it, as no one gives you directions on how to get there. I was lucky that I found it a while back, but otherwise, I might have been searching for around 15 or so minutes. If you're keen, you might have remembered Jeline's description of Uncle Sweetshare. It was completely different to what we got. The Redguard described him as a frail old man who wasn't a Nord. We ended up getting a youthful, in-shape Nord. According to the UESP, this is because originally, Sweetshare was going to be an NPC named Grandfather Frost. Frost was an older Breton male with a white beard. It's also theorized that he was going to wear a red Colovian fur helm. Due to some translations with the name as well as the overall appearance, it's believed that Grandfather Frost was ultimately scrapped for being too close to Santa Claus. Thus, the NPC was changed to Uncle Sweetshare, but the dialogue surrounding him was kept the same, hence the errors in his description. To me, Sweetshare belongs in the Shivering Isles. His personality is perfect for it. He's a man who believes he's doing the right thing. He's attempting to spread happiness to the sad folk of Solstheim, but he's doing it by spiking their food and drink with drugs. What's funny is that in Jeline's case, it almost worked. He felt a euphoria and release, which was unlike anything he had ever felt before. He forgot about his troubles and the loss of his love. However, then came the crash. This is where the NPCs fall ill, and in some cases, even die. Luckily, Jeline was spared, but for many others, including Minashi, they weren't so lucky. If it was possible, I'd send Sweetshare on a one-way ticket to the Shivering Isles, particularly the town of Mania, and from there, let him thrive. Moving on to the second quest for today, this one is the Missing Missionary. In a small way, it ties into the previous storyline. Remember when Uncle Sweetshare mentioned that Jalene's true love disappeared? Well, that's a little detail that not many people know. They know she's currently not at the shrine, but they aren't aware to the Redguard's true feelings. Before I get ahead of myself, let's back up to the beginning of the quest. Seeking out Jalene once more in the shrine area, his opening dialogue is now different. He asks for the conversation to be brief as he's dealing with important cult matters. Inquiring about them, he mentions that his protege, Marissa, left to go do missionary work on Solstheim. She wanted to preach the ways of the Nine Divines to the locals, however, that was weeks ago, and Marissa hasn't been seen since. Jalene then goes on about how the locals are savages as they worship heathen gods like Alduin and Orgi. It's now that Jalene gets a little personal and emotional when talking about her disappearance. He asks for my help in finding her, says she means a great deal to him, and lets it slip that she's important to him. Jalene offers to give me every single piece of gold collected from the Solstheim shrine if I bring her back. All he knows is that Marissa set her sights north to Lake Fjelding, and that's about it. Again, not unlike the last quest, you're left on your own to find the point of interest. However, the search area is narrowed down to the surrounding portion of the lake. Fjelding isn't that big, and if you've done the main questline, you'll have explored most of the general area. For my case, the two big places I haven't gone yet are the Thirsk Mead Hall and the Udafric's Lair. Wanting to leave the latter as a last resort, I investigated the hall first. Outside in one of the smaller huts, there's a weapons dealer named Brynjolfur. Speaking with him, he's frantic and panicked. A great beast stormed into the hall, wreaked havoc, killed his customer, and dragged his body off to its lair. Not really wanting to get into that just yet, I asked him if he's seen Marissa. Brynjolfur's attitude changes a bit here. He sounds spiteful of the girl, but also pities her. He claims that one of his clan brothers, Eric the Unworthy, took her and locked her up in his room. He tortures her inside of the mead hall, and even though no one here shares her beliefs, they can't stand what Eric's doing. However, they can't make a move on him due to their clan's own rules. Now, this is where the quest gets rather interesting. The state of the mead hall changes depending on which part of the main storyline you've made it up to. If you've completed the Skull Test of Strength, the Mead Hall Massacre will have occurred, exactly as Brynjolfur stated. The hall is in complete disrepair and almost everyone's dead. This includes Eric, the antagonist of the entire quest. On Eric's body is a key to his room upstairs, which is only secured by a level 50 lock. Now, if Eric was alive, he would have tried to flirt with your female character, or would have dismissed your male character. When Marissa is brought up, he details the horrible things he's done to her. This is then followed by a fight between the two of you. Fortunately, whatever caused the massacre at Mead Hall didn't bother venturing upstairs. Marissa is still alive in Eric's room, and even though the game doesn't count it, she surely would be on her last leg in terms of food and water. Speaking with her, she begs for my help. She re-explains the situation. Missionary work for the Imperial cult, beat and humiliated by Eric, gone for 3 months, etc. Marissa asks to be freed and if we may travel back to Fort Frostmoth together. At this point, if Eric was still alive, as maybe you had simply snuck past him to the rooms upstairs, he would have confronted you on the way out, bringing on the fight regardless. Eric is a level 18 hunter and wields a silver longsword. Even though I didn't get the chance to fight him, I can't imagine he would have been much more difficult than the average Reaver or crazed Nord out on Solstheim. As for the trek back, it's a bit of a walk, but nothing you can't handle. You'll likely run into wildlife as well as people, and the biggest issue will be keeping Marissa alive. In my case, it wasn't even the enemies that were killing her. It was the fact that she kept getting in the way of my swing, resulting in her instant death. This happened more times than I'd care to admit, but finally, we made it back to the fort, and Jalene was reunited with his crush. In terms of dialogue, Marissa thanked me for bringing her back to safety, and said that Jalene would handle my compensation. Speaking with the man himself, he was extremely grateful, and handed me 300 gold straight from the cult's coffers. As I left, he mentioned again just how invaluable Marissa was to the cult, as well as to him. With that, thus ends the quest, The Missing Missionary. Now, let's talk a little bit about it. Before I mention that the state of Thirsk Mead Hall changes depending on other storylines. Well, Marissa's location can also change depending on if the side quest, the Mead Hall Massacre, was completed or not. If it was, this then transports Marissa away from Thirsk entirely and over to a dungeon called Solfjord. Interestingly, it doesn't seem like her dialogue changes all that much though, if any at all. What's nice is that Solfjord is a lot closer to Fort Frostmoth than Thirsk is, so the trek isn't as lengthy, but it does end up sending the player on a wild goose chase. Another intriguing outcome is if Marissa actually ends up dying, whether from Eric, the wilderness, or the player, wink wink. This will also lead to quest completion, and Jeline will be grief-stricken over the news. He still pays you out the reward, and what's more, you'll find out after some time that the Red Guard ended his own life in order to cope with the situation. He even left behind a note saying, "Without my beautiful Marissa, life is just not worth living. Only in death may I see my love again, so death is the course I choose. May the 9 divines have mercy on my soul." Definitely a bewildering outcome. It seems like it's a shorter road to completing the quest with Marissa out of the picture. However, you won't be able to use her services as she's apparently one of the only NPCs who will still willingly deal with players who are vampires. The Missing Missionary is actually a tale we've heard before. Over on Vardenfell, as part of the Imperial Legion questline, there's a scenario exactly like this one, where Josian Answa goes to preach the good word of the 9 divines to the Arab Benimsum camp. In a similar vein, they didn't take too kindly to others pushing their beliefs on them, and as such, the player needs to rescue the lone missionary. All in all, this quest reflects how difficult it was, and still is, for the Empire to fully control Tamriel. Sure, you can defeat the province in battle and set up guard posts, but having the natives' beliefs and ideals switched over to yours isn't going to be so easy. There's still resistance to the Empire, even if it's something as minute as capturing their preachers. The last piece of information I wanted to mention here is that the UESP calls out both Marissa and Eric as being referenced in the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion. A female Redguard named Marissa is part of the quest, Goblin Trouble. Although this Marissa is an experienced hunter, it can handle herself in a fight. Could this be the same NPC who chose a different lifestyle after the incident at Thirsk, or merely another Marissa altogether? As for Eric, his mention is brief, and his death at the Mead Hall feels fairly canon. However, during the Dark Brotherhood questline, when everything's been wrapped up and it's just the Night Mother giving you contracts, she's able to call out a target by the name of Eric, who can be located at the Thirsk Mead Hall. To me, this feels more coincidental than the previous reference. I think the developers thought someone named Eric from Thirsk would get some players excited, but I don't think it was meant to be the same Eric the Unworthy. Now, let's move on to the final quest for today, the Sad Seer. Unlike the previous two, this one doesn't begin in Fort Frostmoth. The starting location is more remote and slightly trickier to find. On the western side of the island, not far from the coast and a short walk northwest from Raven Rock, you'll come across a small cave called Gaelir the Mumbling's Dwelling. Going on inside, the dungeon is simply a small icy area that holds one NPC, Gaelir the Mumbling, as well as his encampment. It's not much more than wooden planks, barrels, a fire pit, and a small variety of odds and ends. Gaelir is non-hostile, and you can go ahead and talk with him. His dialogue is the third in a row for NPCs outright dismissing the player during their introduction. He says he's not in the mood for visitors, as apparently a Draugr stormed in here, wrecked the place, and took his only friend. Inquiring about said companion, Mumbling goes into detail on his backstory. His whole family was lost at sea a couple of months ago, and now he's all that's left. Everything in here was dragged in from the shipwreck. His only friend is someone named Oddfrid Whitelip. Oddfrid is allegedly able to tell him the future. He rescued her from a place called Colborne Barrow, the same place that the Draugr ended up taking her back to. Gaelir asks for my help in rescuing her. Agreeing, the Nord says that the barrow is to the southeast of here, not far from the coast. He also warns me to be wary of the Draugr. Now, since I wasn't quite sure where to look, I assumed that Colborne Barrow was near Raven Rock. It's slightly southeast of the dwelling and has a few different coastal points. However, after searching for quite some time, I realized that he really meant it was near the coast. However, his dwelling is in the central western part of Solstheim. Technically, given the shape of the island, southeast encompasses almost everything that's south of this landmark. If I had it my way, I would have been searching the southeastern coast of Solstheim, but as would turn out, Colborne Barrow is slightly west of Fort Frostmoth, pretty much dead south of Raven Rock. In any case, going on inside, the only things in there were 2 Draugr. Nothing that's really too challenging for any player. However, that's exactly it. There were no other signs of life. Oddfrid was nowhere to be found, or at least a living Oddfrid. Placed on a stone altar was the skull of Whitelip. Things were starting to make sense now. The name, Gaelir rescuing her from a Draugr-infested tomb, and why the undead wouldn't just eat her on the spot. Snagging the skull, I left the barrow and recalled back to the dwelling. Chatting once more with Gaelir, I handed the skull over, and he was really thankful. He knew the request would have sounded insane if he told me the truth, but he insists that the head really does talk to him. Gaelir then tells me my future, and it does not disappoint. It's apparently very unclear, but Oddfrid says that I've accomplished much here on Solstheim. What she sees in my future could affect everyone. Gaelir then says, when the dragon dies, the Empire dies. Where is the lost dragon's blood, the Empire's sire? And from the womb of the void, who shall stem the blood tide? Ultimately, the Nord isn't quite sure what to make of this, and that's where the quest, the Sad Seer, ends. Now, let's talk about this future reading. I find it to be really intriguing. Many believe, and it's practically confirmed, that this prophecy is referring to the events of Oblivion. It's another foreshadow from one of Morrowind's expansions, as we heard something similar from an NPC over in Mournhold. When the dragon dies, the Empire dies. This refers to Uriel Septim's assassination and the fall of the Septim Empire. Where is the lost dragon's blood, the Empire's sire? This seems to be referring to Martin Septim, the last heir of the Septim dynasty, and his role in the main storyline. From the womb of the void, who shall stem the blood tide? This is likely referring to Mehrunes Dagon's invasion and the beginning of the Oblivion Crisis. Like I said, I find this really interesting, and I wonder if players back then caught on to the fact that this was foreshadowing the events of the next installment. Now, Gaelir claims to be a seer, a fortune teller. Through the mysterious powers of Oddfrid Whitelip, a voice is able to tell him the future. We know that he's not crazy because the events he laid out come to fruition. What's more, the Draugr themselves set out from the other side of the island, bombarded the cave, and stole back this strange skull. Even these undead flesh eaters knew that there was something special about Oddfrid Whitelip. So who could that skull have belonged to, and why is it so powerful? Unfortunately, those aren't answers that we get. Oddfrid is just a nickname, and there's not much information regarding the burials. Could have belonged to an adventurer, perhaps a native to the island, a powerful mage even. It's really hard to say, but one thing's for sure, the skull seems to be important to both the living and the dead. We've seen skulls show up in certain Daedric artifacts, like for example the Skull of Corruption, and Solstheim is no stranger to Daedric influences. It wouldn't surprise me if this was some sort of relic from a Daedric entity, one who knew of Dagon's coming plans. In today's video, I wanted to go over the tale of Athalor and the Falmer featured in the Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind's Bloodmoon. This story aims to shed some light on the disappearance of the Snow Elves, and while we know what happened to them through the events of Skyrim, it's pretty fascinating to hear Morrowind's take on it. In order to begin the quest in search of the Falmer, the player needs to have at least reached the quest Bar Brawl in the East Empire Company storyline. The colony's tavern will have been completely built, and new NPCs will be stationed there. Among them is the High Elf, Athalor. It's quite interesting to see him here, as most of the villagers are either Dunmer or Imperial. Sparking up a conversation with him is what begins the quest. Upon your first interaction, he'll inform you that he's on Solstheim in order to carry out some research. This is followed by him handing the player a Cyrodiilic brandy. Following up on said research, he says that he's studying the Falmer, or the Snow Elves. According to Nordic tales, the Falmer live in cold and isolated climates, quite unlike any of their elven kin. Since they're so steeped in folklore, they're often blamed for many natural disasters and local mysteries. Many believe them to be the Reeklings, but Athalor knows better than to believe that. Before he continues on, he hands the player another drink. From there, the Altmer begins to share his theories. He believes that the Snow Elves were a true race of Mer, similar to the Altmer, Dunmer, Bosmer, Dwemer, Chimer, etc. However, he thinks that they simply faded off. The Falmer bred with the other elves, and the Snow Clan was ultimately phased out due to dominating traits from the other races of Myr. He claims that the Snow Elves play a very important part in elven ancestry, which leads him into his next point, but not before another Cyrodiilic brandy. Athalor, the Altmer standing before you, believes that he's a descendant of the Falmer. It's just a hunch, but he feels a strong connection to the Snow Clan and their peoples. He'd like to learn more about the elves and prove that they're not just mere weaklings, but a strong and proud race. While he's just a nobleman, Athalor is looking to hire an adventurer, and through the exchange of another Cyrodiilic brandy, it's pretty obvious that he's buttering you up. Finally, the High Elf cuts to the chase and offers the player some work. He needs you to do some exploring and investigating for him. Accepting the proposition, he gives you your task. While it's a little vague, he wants the player to check out Solstheim's ancient sites. Tombs, barrows, crypts, groves, etc., in hopes to find some evidence on the Falmer's existence. As a traveling expense, he hands over 200 gold and bids you farewell. Now, like mentioned before, there really isn't much direction for this quest, other than to go dungeon crawling. There are plenty of caves and burial grounds that could be looked into. Going in blind, it could take quite some time to locate the proper quest item. However, only one of these dungeons holds knowledge on the Falmer. By the Altar of Thrond and the Patchwork Airship crash site, there lies a crypt called Yolgir Barrow. The barrow itself is incredibly small, and it's guarded by a lone hellhound. At the center of the dungeon is an altar. Placed on the stone pedestal is an incomplete set of ancient steel armor, an enchanted weapon called the Spear of the Snow Prince, and a book called The Fall of the Snow Prince. Simply picking up the book will give you the necessary journal update to complete the quest. However, its contents are quite fascinating and worth the read. From whence he came, we did not know, but into the battle he rode on a brilliant steed of pallid white. Elf we call him, for elf he was, yet unlike any other of his kind we'd ever seen before that day. His spear and armor bore the radiant and terrible glow of unknown magicka, and so adorned this unknown rider seemed more white than warrior. What troubled, nay frightened us most at the moment was the call that rose from the elven ranks. It was not fear, not wonder, but an unabashed and unbridled joy, the kind of felicity felt by a damned man who has been granted a second chance at life. For at the time, the elves were as damned and near death as ever they had been during the great skirmishes of Solstheim. The Battle of the Mosring was to be the final stand between Nord and Elf on our fair island. Led by Ysgrimor, we had driven the elven scourge from Skyrim and were intent on cleansing Solstheim of their kind as well. Our warriors, armed with the finest axes and swords Nord craftsmen could forge, cut great swaths through the enemy ranks. The slopes of the Mosrings ran red with blood. Why then would our foe rejoice? Could one rider bring such hope to an army so hopeless? To most of our kind, the meaning of the call was clear, but the words were but a litany of elven chants and cries. There were some among us, however, the scholars and chroniclers, who knew well the words and shuddered at their significance. The Snow Prince is come, doom is at hand. There was then a great calm that overcame the elves that stood still. Through their mass the Snow Prince did ride, and as a longboat slices through the icy waters of the Fjelding, he parted the ranks of his kin. The magnificent white horse slowed to a gallop, then a trot, and the unknown elf rider moved to the front of the line at a slow, almost ghost-like pace. A Nord warrior sees much in a life of bloodshed and battle, and is rarely surprised by anything armed combat may bring. But few among us that day could have imagined the awe and uncertainty of a raging battlefield that all at once went motionless and silent. Such is the effect the Snow Prince had on us all. For when the joyous cries of the elves had ended, there remained a quiet known only in the solitude of slumber. It was then our combined host, elf and Nord alike, were joined in a terrible understanding. Victory or defeat mattered little that day on the slopes of the Mosring Mountains. The one truth we all shared was that death would come to many that day, victor and vanquished alike. The glorious Snow Prince, an elf unlike any other, did come that day to bring death to our kind, and death he so brought. Like a sudden, violent snow squall that rends travelers blind and threatens to tear loose the very foundations of the sturdiest hall, the Snow Prince did sweep into our numbers. Indeed, the ice and snow did begin to swirl and churn about the elf, as if called upon to serve his bidding. The spinning of that gleaming spear whistled a dirge to all those who would stand in the way of the Snow Prince, and our mightiest fell before him that day. Ulfgi Anvilhand, Strom the White, Freda Oakenwand, Heimdall the Frenzied, all lay dead at the foot of the Mosring Mountains. For the first time that day, It seemed like the tide of battle had actually turned. The elves, spurred on by the deeds of the Snow Prince, rallied together for one last charge against our ranks. It was then, in a single instant, the Battle of the Mosring came to a sudden and unexpected end. Finna, daughter of Jofreyr, a lass of only 12 years and squire to her mother, watched as the Snow Prince cut down her only parent. In her rage and sorrow, Finna picked up Jofreyr's sword and threw it savagely at her mother's killer. When the elf's gleaming spear stopped its deadly dance, the battlefield fell silent, and all eyes turned to the Snow Prince. No one that day was more surprised than the elf himself at the sight that greeted them all. For upon his great steed, the Snow Prince still sat, the sword of Jofreyr buried deeply in his breast. And then he fell from his horse, from the battle, from life. The Snow Prince lay dead, slain by a child. With their savior defeated, the spirit of the remaining elven warriors soon shattered. Many fled, and those that remained on the battlefield were soon cut down by our broad Nord axes. When the day was done, all that remained was the carnage of the battlefield. And from that battlefield came a dim reminder of valor and skill, for the brilliant armor and spear of the Snow Prince still shined. Even in death, this mighty and unknown elf filled us with awe. It is common practice to burn the corpses of our fallen foes. This is as much as a necessity as it is custom, for death brings with it disease and dread. Our chieftains wished to cleanse Solstheim of the elven horde, in death as well as life. It was decided, however, that such was not to be the fate of the Snow Prince. One so mighty in war, yet so loved by his kin, deserved better, even in death, even if an enemy of our people. And so we brought the body of the Snow Prince, wrapped in fine silks, to a freshly dug barrow. The gleaming armor and spear were presented on a pedestal of honor, and the tomb was arrayed with treasures worthy of royalty. All of the mighty chieftains agreed with this course, that the elf should be so honored. His body would be preserved in the barrow for as long as the earth chose, but would not be offered the protection of our Stalrim, which was reserved for Nord dead alone. So ends this account of the Battle of the Mosring, and the fall of the magnificent elven Snow Prince. May our gods honor him in death, and may we never meet his kind again in life. With the book in hand, the player can loot the rest of the barrow, and then return to Athalor at Raven Rock. He'll ask you if you found any evidence on the Falmer, and that's when you can inform him of your findings at Yolgir Barrow. Athalor becomes quite intrigued by the fall of the Snow Prince. He's more than certain that the prince was a snow elf, and it seems like this discovery will go a long way for his research. As a reward, the Altmer gives you 800 gold, totaling 1,000 for the entire quest. If you speak with Athalor again, he happily explains that his research is taking him to Skyrim. There, he hopes to continue to find more answers on the Falmer, and with that, he bids you one last farewell. Before wrapping up the mission, there is one more matter to take care of. You might have noticed that there was a piece of armor missing from Yolgir's barrow. The ancient steel helm was nowhere to be found. However, that's because it's a part of its own little treasure hunt. At the bottom of Lake Fjelding, the player will come across a lone skeleton. In its inventory is an old wet note. Picking it up, it reads, Winterfist, it is as we feared. Angria and her rabble are intent on stealing the Snow Prince's armor from Yolgir Barrow. My men drove them off, but they grabbed the helmet. I know they're hiding somewhere here on the island. They've been seen before near Lake Fjelding in the Fricked Ice Cave, so try looking there. I'll join up with you as soon as I'm able. Heinlein the Heavy. The Fricked Ice Cave is located in the northern part of Solstheim, just east of Castle Karstag. Going on in, you'll be met with the resistance of skeletons. After defeating the groups of undead, the next goal is to look for Angria's corpse. It isn't among any of the obvious bone piles. Instead, you'll need some sort of levitation or jumping spell to reach it. Angria's remains are stuck to the dungeon ceiling, and inside of her inventory is the ancient steel helm. With In Search of the Falmer wrapped up, let's talk a little bit about the Snow Elves. It's a little surreal going from Skyrim to Bloodmoon. The creatures go from a mere rumor to a prominent main enemy in the game. Within the Nordic province, the Falmer have a strong presence in the Dwemer ruins. While few have ventured into those dungeons, even fewer have lived to tell the tales. However, without proper texts, studies, and knowledge, how can one even identify those abominations as the once proud Snow Elves? It's rather interesting to think where Athalor's studies have taken him and what further truths he's discovered. Now, there was a brief period during this quest where I was a little confused on the lore. I've since done some research and have cleared things up for myself. If you're at all confused or just curious on the lore, I'll go over it right now. Lokim, the transcriber of the fall of the Snow Prince, mentions battling Snow Elves as well as a mighty mounted Myr, This majestic pale elf seems like a living, sentient, and free snow elf, certainly a far cry off from the modern-day Falmer. However, the author talks about Ysgramor's conquest in the past tense, meaning that this is one of the last stands for the Northern Elves, pushing them to the brink of extinction. It's confirmed that the Battle of Mosring was Nords against Snow Elves. So, if all the elves that were battling looked exactly like him, how then could none of the Nords identify the Snow Prince as a Falmer? Was this specimen a unique and powerful leader to the Ice Folk, or something else? If they spent the last couple of years battling the Snow Elves, surely one of the Northerners would be able to identify this warrior as a member of the opposing clan. Well, to answer that, I suppose no one quite knows what the Falmer actually looked like, at least no one alive. For all they know, the elves really could have been Reeklings, and the Snow Prince was some sort of demon, ghost, or undead. So I can understand the confusion in that space. However, through Dawnguard's Gelibor, we can see how the description of the Snow Prince accurately matches a Snow Elf. Now, the part I was confused on was, when do the Falmer get betrayed? It sounds like Ysgramor's conquest in Skyrim was practically over. When do the mighty Snow Elves turn into the monstrous modern-day Falmer? Well, other than the fall of the Snow Prince, the only other text in Bloodmoon that mentions the Falmer is Avar Stonesinger. While the epic seems like a blend of fact and fiction, the Falmer's description leans more towards the blind, goblin-like monsters that we see in the later games. They have their own types of weapons and armor. They seem to attack without strategy. They're inherently evil, are servants of the quote-unquote adversary, and dwell within the remote parts of nature. Of course though, that's exactly how a Nord would describe their sworn enemy, whether they're hideous, violent creatures or not. Without exact timelines in the fall of the Snow Prince and Avar Stonesinger, it's hard to tell whether or not the Snow Elves were already either endangered or mutated. However, there is one text in Skyrim that might help to shed some light on things. It's called The Falmer, a study which was written by Ursa Uthrax. Ursa makes mention of the fall of the Snow Prince. They call the Snow Prince the Great Falmer Leader, meaning that this specimen was indeed a uniquely strong and powerful individual, so it's no wonder that they couldn't quite identify it as a Snow Elf. Back to the text, it says that the remaining Falmer forces scattered right after the Battle of Mosring. They fled to the depths of the earth, taking refuge with the Dwemer in Blackreach. That's where the Snow Elves, as we know them, turned into the modern-day monsters, as the dwarves tricked, tortured, and mutilated them. They were fed a fungus that made them and their offspring blind. Years underground heightened their other senses and turned their bodies into weapons. Eventually, the Falmer overthrew the dwarves of Blackreach, and the War of the Crag had begun. The battles raged on for years until one day, the Dwemer vanished. With the Falmer free to roam the dwarven cities, they turned their attention toward the overworld. What started out as sloppy, unorganized attacks turned into strategical raiding parties. The fear is that one day, the Falmer will rise up and reclaim what's rightfully theirs, the province of Skyrim. We can only hope that Athalor's studies don't take him to those dwarven cities, as more than likely, he won't be returning. Thirsk has a few quests tied to it, but the two I wanted to focus on today are the Mead Hall Massacre and Mead Hall Business. These stories involve death, destruction, worthiness, triumph, and have sowed the seeds for an unmarked quest, which is featured in Morrowind's successor, Oblivion. As per usual, the facts and information provided are brought to you by the game itself and the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages. Beginning with the Mead Hall Massacre, it all starts with the player on Solstheim. In order for this quest to activate, you must have gotten up to the Skull Test of Strength for the expansion's main storyline. That giant burning flame off of Lake Fjelding had a larger impact on the island than anyone could have imagined. Approaching the Mead Thirsk Hall in the east, you might come across a man named Brynjolfur in one of the side huts. Speaking with him, he introduces the player to the great slaughter that just occurred. A frightening beast ran into the hall, tore the place up, slew most of the Nords, and took off immediately after, dragging away Brynjolfur's only customer. Entering Thirsk, you'll get to see all of the carnage for yourself. Bodies have been thrown everywhere, plus support beams and wooden posts have been knocked over. There are only a couple of survivors. Depending on if you completed the quest, the Missing Missionary, Marissa the Redguard might be upstairs, along with Beredit Jastel. However, the person of interest for this quest is Svenja Snowsong, the only Nord left alive in the Great Hall. Speaking with her, she begins by saying that something entered the Mead Hall and slew everyone inside. It came without warning, and even though the Nords fought bravely, they were far outmatched. Svenja managed to tag the beast with a couple of arrows, and it ran back to its dwelling. But she's certain it'll come back. The creature attacked without warning, and Snowsong says she's never seen something so savage before in her life. She makes a guess that this beast was the Udafrict. Inquiring about said monster, Svenja says that it has a taste for human flesh. The Udafrict has been sealed away in its lair for many years. Its cave was closed off by ice, and she doesn't understand how it could have gotten out. It's just then, though, that she thinks about the Great Fire over Lake Fjelding, the very same one that involved the quest, the Skull Test of Strength. Snowsong says that the beast must be stopped before it wreaks more havoc across the island. She then asks if you're up to the task. Svenja explains that each new chieftain of Thirsk must present a trophy in order to lead the mead hall. If the player is to slay the Udafrict, that will surely be enough to grant you the title. Promising her that she'll claim the throne of Thirsk, she directs you to the cave's entrance, which is west of Lake Fjelding. The lair of the Udafrict is right on the shoreline just below the mead hall. Previously, before the Great Flame over Fjelding, there would have been a sheet of ice closing off the entrance. However, going up to the den, you'll now notice that it's completely open and anything can come and go as it pleases. Heading on in, the lair is pretty small. It consists of one long tunnel which leads to a small circular room. Followed by that is a tiny nook at the back. It won't take you long to find the unnerving beast. Its fur is as black as night, its eyes have a sinister green glow, and its teeth are razor sharp. It strikes using its claws, and it doesn't take long to find out that it's a formidable foe. Even though the UESP only places it at level 11, it has 1000 health points, 100% resistances to fire, frost, poison, shock, and normal weapons, and it can deal anywhere from 5 to 50 points of damage. It took my character quite a few hits to take down, and that's while using the Spear of the Hunter and with a spear skill of 100. Once the beast is defeated, you can loot the heart of the Udafrict as your trophy. In its inventory, there's also a severed Nordleg, which acts as a unique blunt weapon. From there, you can loot the rest of the lair for some minor loot. When finished, Svenja Snowsong will be waiting for the player just outside of Thirsk. Speaking with her, she's about to deny you access into the hall when she finally notices the heart of the Udafrict. Shocked and in awe, she says that you are truly a great warrior of song. Svenja takes the heart and declares that as soon as Thirsk is cleaned up, it'll be placed on the pedestal, bringing you one step closer to the title of chieftain. However, there's one final detail that needs to be taken care of. Inquiring about it, Snowsong asks you to find the barrow of Hrothmund the Red. He was the first chieftain of Thirsk, and you must seek his approval in order to become the leader. Inside the barrow is his axe. Grabbing a hold of it, you'll receive his blessing if you're deemed worthy. Unless you know the lore, it's also highly recommended to ask Svenja for a little secret. Here, she'll reveal to the player that the great beast which defeated Hrothmund in battle was named Onjag. The only hint that Snowsong gives you is that the barrow can be found at the Eye of the Wolf. You also learn that it's somewhere up in the mountains. Solstheim is full of rolling hills and rocky terrain, but the tallest mountains are in the northern section of the island. As for the hint, the Eye of the Wolf, if you've done the quest, the Patchwork Airship, you likely would have already been to the spot. If not, just south of Castle Karstag, you'll spot what looks to be the outline of a wolf on your local map. The eye of said wolf is the entrance to Hrothmund's barrow.
Some they call me Hrothmund's bane, with midnight teeth and moonlight mane. I am the wolf one soul may tame, by uttering my given name. But speak the truth, for those who lie gain not the wealth beyond my eye. Answer false and evermore, closed shut will be my icy door. What is my name? You spoke the truth and won the game, for Onjag is my given name. You have gained entrance to Hrothmund's barrow.
Be very careful as to which answer you choose, as the wrong one can lock you out of this quest for good. As mentioned prior, Onjag is the great wolf who slew Hrothmund the Red in battle. Similar to the lair of the Udafrict, Hrothmund's barrow is fairly small and, as of right now, void of life. After clearing the entrance area, there's one small chamber at the back which holds Hrothmund's axe. Interacting with it, the game displays the message, you grasp the mighty axe of Hrothmund and utter your intention to rule over Thirsk. In answer of approval, Hrothmund grants his blessing. Unfortunately, you can't do much else with the axe. However, you will receive a temporary effect. In my case, it was Sanctuary for 5 points, and there's some minor loot for the taking. Once finished up in here, you can return to the Thirsk Mead Hall for a pleasant surprise. Upon going inside, you'll see that the hall's been cleaned up. The bodies are gone, the pillars have been lifted, and there are even new faces in here. Burglyot and Bathmar Boldloot.
In the cave he met the beast, and cut quite short its evil feast. And when the Udafreg did fall, the chieftain came and claimed his hall.
All hail the chieftain of Thirsk, slayer of the Udafreg. May the mead flow forever.
Speaking with Svenja Snowsong once more, she makes it officially known that you're the new chieftain of Thirsk. She understands that it's a tall task and that you're a busy adventurer, so she offers to become your second in command. This is where the Mead Hall Massacre concludes and Mead Hall business begins. However, the actual content for this quest is rather brief. Svenja mentions that there's business to tend to, and she also encourages you to go and look around the chieftain's quarters. Snowsong says that she left a present for you up there, one that's worthy of a true warrior. Heading on up, it's a one-handed longblade called Clanbringer. It has the enchantments of Rally Humanoid for 10 to 20 points and 20 feet of target, Sanctuary for 1 to 5 points, and Fortify Personality for 1 to 5 points as well. All of these are for a total of 120 seconds. Whilst up here, highly recommended is to check out the side rooms as you'll run into the NPC Barrett Jastel. Chatting with him, he gives you a revised edition on the history of Thirsk Mead Hall. It's a lengthy read but discusses the lore of Thirsk, your role in rebuilding it, and its relations with others on this island. The lore starts out with a small group of Nords who broke away from the Skull. They wanted to live more like their ancestors did back on Skyrim, so they built the Thirsk Mead Hall. Construction was tiring, long, and most notably, noisy. The ruckus caused an ancient beast to wake from its slumber. This beast was the Udafreg, and it charged into Thirsk, slaying more than half of its inhabitants. After it fled back to its lair, someone by the name of Eldred Icelight was able to seal it in its cave. While this first massacre was a huge setback, the Nords continued their work and the Mead Hall was restored. During this time, two men sought to be the leader of Thirsk, Hrothman the Red and Drengr Bronzehelm. Tensions built, so Hrothman caught Drengr by surprise and beheaded him. He placed Bronzehelm's head on a pedestal and thus began the tradition of presenting a trophy for leadership. Many years went by and Hrothman started to yearn for battle and adventure. He learned of a great wolf named Onjag and ventured out to slay the beast. However, he bit off more than he could chew as he was no match for this great foe. He was devoured whole by the beast. His axe was the only thing left behind. In solidarity for Hrothman, all the residents of Thirsk Mead Hall stormed off to the mountains and defeated Onjag. The next section of the book describes your role and place in Thirsk's history, defeating the Udafreg, placing its heart on the pedestal, and receiving Hrothman's blessing. Following that is a list of all the chieftains who came before you. It details who or what they slew in order to become the leader of Thirsk and how long they were chieftain for. The final part discusses the politics of the clan. The residents of the Mead Hall and the Skull are on friendly terms. They even trade with one another. Outsiders are welcome at the hall, and even those who left its confines in search of a different life are always allowed back in. Thirsk and the Legion at Fort Frostmoth are on the same page. They leave each other alone and keep out of one another's way. Finally, the chieftain's word is law around Thirsk. Whatever they say goes, and while the hall is mostly peaceful and filled with camaraderie, fights are bound to break out. Continuing with the task at hand, the player can ask Svenja about the Mead Hall business that needs tending to. Snowsong says that there are a couple of different jobs that need to be looked after. One option is to order meat from Skyrim. By selecting this one, she says that the shipment should arrive in about a week's time. Simultaneously, you can ask her to send the hunters out for snow bear and snow wolf pelts. She says that these items can be brought to Brynjolfur the smith if you want to make custom armor. Again, the hunt will take about a week to complete. When the meat arrives, Svenja will say there's now plenty for sale and the shipment was brought to your room. Once per week, you can collect the Mead Hall's earnings, which will be a whopping 50 gold. However, the real prize comes from these 60 bottles of mead. Each one is valued at around 80 gold. Similarly, once the hunters have returned from their hunt, 5 snow bear pelts and 5 snow wolf pelts are gifted to the player. Again, those can either be sold or made into armor by Brynjolfur. The final icing on the cake is that new decor has been added to Thirsk. The heads of the slain beasts have been thrown up on the walls upstairs. Whilst the 50 gold can be collected each week, that's all there is for shipments of mead as well as pelts from hunters. With that, thus concludes the quest, Mead Hall Business. Now, let's switch the conversation over to the most interesting focal point of the questline, the Udafreg. Fans of Morrowind's successors will have recognized the monster almost immediately. They would have probably also been familiar with Svenja Snowsong and even the Massacre at Thirsk Mead Hall. In the Elder Scrolls IV Oblivion, the player comes across a location called Dive Rock over in the Gerald Mountains. There's a camp set up there, but nobody's around. All that's left behind are some belongings and a journal. The journal was written by Agnar, a Nord who took the role of chieftain after the Nerevarine left for Akavir. Describes how he met and fell in love with Svenja Snowsong, the sole survivor of the Mead Hall Massacre. While he enjoyed the pleasantries and spoils of Thirsk, Svenja was suffering in silence. That massacre had been replaying over and over in her head until one day she had enough. She thought that the best way of getting over her fears was to confront them. Through a network of information, she learned that the beast was the spawn of the Udafric matron. From there, both Agnar and Svenja tracked the eyewitness reports to the Gerald Mountains. That's where they heard the legend, the horror of Dive Rock. They finally located the beast and set out to destroy it. However, their efforts were in vain. Svenja's Frostworm bow was rendered useless, and Agnar's steel battle axe did nothing to the creature. Both Nords perished during the battle, with Svenja Snowsong's end coming from the belly of the beast. While the Udafric matron has partial invisibility, its stats are actually inferior to the Udafric on Solstheim. The UESP places it at level 18, but it only has 500 points of health, or 195 in the remake. It only deals 26 points of damage, and it only has resistance to frost. Sure, it restores 2 points of health per second, but it has a 175% weakness to fire. However, the Udafric line doesn't end there. The matron's offspring can also be found in Skyrim in the Dawnstar Sanctuary. While going through the quest, The Cure for Madness, the player chases after Cicero in the abandoned Dark Brotherhood lair. Running through some natural caverns, you end up bumping into an Udafric, and it more or less behaves like a really powerful troll. It's level 22, which is the highest level out of all three, but it actually has the least amount of health, sitting only at 460 points. It also regenerates health over time and has weaknesses to fire. While there isn't much in the way of lore with this one, it's a nice nod to the previous installments and is tied in with the faction storyline, so it's hard to miss. Depending on where the Elder Scrolls 6 takes place, I wouldn't be surprised if we see another offspring or even an Udafric patron in the game. The last bit of information I wanted to cover is what the Udafric of Bloodmoon is a reference to. This idea comes straight from the USP, and I highly suggest reading over every detail for yourself if you want to get into the thick of it. The common theory is that the Mead Hall Massacre and the Udafric are direct references to Beowulf. In the Old English poem, a creature known as Grendel storms the Mead Hall of Heorot, attacks its residents, and eats their flesh. Beowulf is the one to defeat said creature, and afterwards, he even takes on Grendel's mother, which could very well be a reference to the Udafric matron. To continue the connections, apparently the severed Nord leg, that's actually a blunt weapon, serves as the severed arm which Beowulf hangs in the rafters of Heorot. Finally, Hrothmund the Red, the first chieftain of Thirsk, is seen as a reference to Hrothmund and Beowulf, the son of King Hrothgar. While I personally wasn't super familiar with the epic Beowulf, it was really neat to get to read the parallels and references between the questline in Bloodmoon and the Old English poem. Let's hear the tale of two ships that crash landed on the island of Solstheim. The vessels are certainly different from one another. One of them is an airship. Its craftsmanship isn't the greatest, but it opens the door for a discussion on continental travel. The other is a more traditional, seaworthy watercraft. Definitely nothing out of the ordinary, but its backstory is perhaps more tragic and its impact runs deeper. The quests in question for today are the Patchwork Airship and the Cursed Captain, featured in the Elder Scrolls III Morrowind's expansion, Bloodmoon. As per usual, the facts and information provided are brought to you by the game itself and the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages. While the majority of the quest takes place on Solstheim, the quest giver for the Patchwork Airship is actually located back on Vvardenfell. You might have noticed an odd Breton, Louis Beauchamp, standing outside of Aldruin's Mages Guild Hall. Speaking with him for the first time, you quickly pick up on his personality. He seems like a rather awkward fellow. He lacks confidence and comes off as rather timid. He mentions something about the player being a messenger for his airship and then quickly runs back on his word. This activates the quest and brings up said vessel as a conversation topic. Beauchamp stutters and stumbles his way through the response. However, he ends up telling the player that he managed to build an airship out of old Dwemer parts. A ship that doesn't need to sail through the sea, one that can fly in the air. He hired a crew to fly over to Solstheim in search of Hrothmund's barrow. Inside the barrow is a specific item that he's been looking for. Inquiring about the spot, Louis explains that the barrow is a tomb for Hrothmund the Red. It's said that the barrow is marked by a formation of rocks that are in the shape of a wolf. The eye of the wolf is the entrance to the tomb. The crew needed to use an airship in order to even see the formation, as it's only visible from the sky. Beauchamp then mentions that the crew was searching for an amulet. According to the legends, this amulet belonged to Hrothmund. It's said that Hrothmund wasn't much of a looker. If anything, Louis goes as far as calling him ugly. However, the Nord was really popular with the ladies. It's said that he wore the amulet of infectious charm, a relic that Beauchamp wants to get his hands on. Louis's mind wanders, and he theorizes that the crew found the amulet but took it for themselves. He himself even says what kind of a woman can resist a man in an airship while he's wearing the amulet. This is where the Breton asks the player for their help. He wants you to retrieve the necklace, as well as discover what happened to the ship. Shocked at your willingness to help him, he directs you to Solstheim and reveals some vital information. The barrow is sealed by powerful magic. The passphrase is Onjag. If you get it wrong, however, the tomb will be closed off forever. Given Beauchamp's personality and lack of confidence, it appears that he wants to step up his game a bit. He wants to become the pickup artist that he's always dreamt of being. He tried out Alpha Male University and didn't have much luck, so he's going for the more direct approach. The first step for this quest is locating the airship and its crew. If you didn't know much about Solstheim's geography and lore, you might be running around for a bit. However, if you played through some of the other quests in Bloodmoon or have ventured around the island, you might have come across the airship already. On the northern part of the island, in the Mosring Mountain region, you'll spot a destroyed Dwemer vessel. Scattered around are its various parts, as well as the bodies of its crew. It looks like they met a pretty grisly end. The conditions up here are harsh, but the wildlife is harsher. Near the airship is a small makeshift camp. This is where the captain of the expedition, Roberto Jodoin, took his last breath. By his corpse is his journal. It reads, Entry 1. Today is the day. Beauchamp's airship seems sturdy enough, and the crew is ready to set sail. We'll travel north-northwest until we reach the island of Solstheim. According to Beauchamp, the Hrothmund's Bane Wolf formation is somewhere near the Mosring Mountains. The barrow we're set to explore is located at the Wolf's Eye. We'll get Beauchamp's precious magic item and be back at the Guild of Mages in a few days. What could possibly go wrong? Entry 4. Damn conjurers, sorcerers, inventors, scientists, and all their academic ilk. Beauchamp promised me his airship would hold together. Promised me it could be sailed just like a sea-bound craft. All lies. This monstrosity is barely holding together. We've been trailing bits and pieces of it ever since we left Aldrun. Just an hour ago, we lost one of the Dwemer cogs from the main engine. If this were a frigate or a slough, I'd be holding her together just fine. But alas, trying to control an airship is like setting to sea in a barrel with a spoon for an oar. Entry 6. Land ho. Entry 7. It's normal for a crew member to get edgy, but the Argonian finally went berserk. I told him repeatedly before we left Aldrum that an airship sails in the sky, and not on the water. He told me he understood, but his fear of heights must have finally taken sway. In a frenzied state, he grabbed the wheel and almost forced us into the sea. I had no choice but to run him through. Swims and Swells was his name, and a good crew member he was before this unfortunate incident. I would have preferred a burial at sea, but considering our current situation, we had no choice but to toss his body overboard. We aimed for the ocean, but by that time, the airship had drifted over Solstheim. Alas, I fear we missed, and his corpse landed somewhere on the southeastern shore. Entry 9. We've located Hrothmund's Bane. At least Beauchamp was right about something. The wolf formation runs from west to east, with the head and eye towards the eastern end. We'll look for a place to set down and then explore Hrothmund's Barrow, assuming that is where Beauchamp said it would be. I must also note that the going is slower than I'd like. There's a fell chill in the air, and I don't trust the dark clouds that have gathered over the mountains. Entry 11. We've been assailed by a blizzard, the likes of which I have never seen. I feared a storm, but could have never imagined anything like this. Beauchamp's contraption is coming apart at the seams, and I don't think we can hold altitude. There's nowhere to land, but land we must. Entry 12. Dead. All of them dead. Most of the crew were killed. Instantly, when the airship went down, the few that made it soon succumbed to the cold. I alone survived. Need to make camp. Snow is blocking my way into the ship's hold. I go to the barrow in the morning. I can hardly write. My hands are nearly frozen. Entry 13. So cold, so cold. So hungry. Madness taking me. I can feel it. See eyes, night eyes, wolf eyes. Hear them. So hungry. Eye of wolf, coming. White wolf, so cold. With the crew's whereabouts and fate uncovered, it's time to finish what you'd started. Hrothman's barrow is to the north of the downed airship. What's interesting about this quest is how closely it ties into another one. The Mead Massacre also has the player venturing off to Hrothman's barrow. This is in search of another artifact. However, once you've gained access to the tomb, you no longer need to worry about remembering the passphrase. What's nice about the Patchwork Airship is that Beauchamp directly gives you the phrase for the enchanted door. It comes up naturally in conversation, whereas with Svenja Snowsong, you have to pry it out of her, and it can easily be overlooked. At most in the barrow, you'll come across a bone wolf, but it's not very likely. At the back chamber, sitting on the pedestal by Hrothman's axe, is the Amulet of Infectious Charm. It does indeed fortify the wearer's personality by 30 points for 30 seconds. So, that should help Louis with his girl problems. However, the wearer is also weakened to common diseases by 30 points for 30 seconds, as well as drains their fatigue for the same stats. For what Beauchamp is using it for, it should be fine. However, if the person he's trying to pick up has blight or is a vampire, he might be in for one good time. Returning to the Breton, he asks how everything went. Handing over the journal and the amulet, Louis pretty much reveals his true nature. He's devastated about the lost time and money that went into building the airship, and the crew's well-being was an afterthought. As a reward, he gives the player 2,000 gold. Funnily enough, if the player returns to Beauchamp after the quest, he reveals that the amulet is working for him. He's been picking up dates left, right, and center. However, he's been battling a fever, coughs a lot, and can't shake this general feeling of fatigue. I suppose the amulet is working in every possible way. Before moving on, I wanted to discuss the airship. To me, the concept is really intriguing, especially in a game like the elderscrolls where boats, horses, and silt striders are the main vessels for long forms of travel. For a while, I assumed that Beauchamp's MacGyvered airship was the first of its kind. However, after some research over on the UESP, I learned that I was sorely mistaken. The Dwemer already had blueprints for these crafts and even engineered more than a few of them. For example, in the Elder Scrolls Redguard, an Imperial by the name of Lord Amiel Richten traveled around in one. He attempted to use it for his hasty escape over in Stros Mackay, where it eventually crash landed. Beings like the Slode have airships as well. While their aircrafts work a little differently, using living gas bags instead of levitation magic, it still works like a charm. So that begs the question. Why aren't there more airships in use, especially during the installments like Morrowind and Skyrim where Dwemer ruins are abundant? Well, if I had to guess, there are probably a couple of reasons. Number one, Dwemer parts aren't that easy to come by. While the player delves into Dwarven ruins pretty frequently, most scholars need ample supplies, protection, and permissions to explore them. Dwemer artifacts are even on the Empire's list of banned trade goods, so the average Joe would have had a real tough time acquiring them. Even for the Mages Guild, the odd cog or pipe seems to be enough for a whole study. Gathering enough parts, putting them all together, and then enchanting it with the right spells seems like a tall task, even for Morrowind's brightest minds. Now of course, that begs the question, how did Louis do it? Honestly, I'm not really sure. He likely operated outside of the Mages Guild's rules, illegally purchased some Dwemer artifacts, and then must have gained some extensive knowledge on enchanting. Or he simply got his hands on some rare Dwemer blueprints, which explained everything. The second possible reason as to why airships aren't being used is that as time goes on, maybe the Dwemer are fading deeper and deeper into Tamriel's history. During the events of Morrowind, it seems like Dwarven culture and lore is steeped into Vardenfell's bones. Their ruins are abundant, and their artifacts are everywhere. However, in the next game, Oblivion, they don't have much of a footprint in Cyrodiil, and the dwarves were put to the wayside. While Skyrim has its fair share of Dwemer remnants and unique takes on the Dwemer, it seems like more people are focused on the war and its impacts throughout the land. There's simply not enough time, resources, or manpower to put into research like that. Moving along, this next quest is quite brief. The cursed captain begins on the island of Solstheim. Up on the western shores, not too far from the downed ship, the player will come across a lone Nord, Thormor Greywave. He's longingly staring out into the sea. Speaking with him, he greets the player and says that he doesn't see many folks come out this way. Greywave spends most of his time looking out at the water. He explains that he used to be the captain of a ship, but that was before that one tragic night out at sea. Inquiring about it, he says that he was bringing some Nords from Skyrim over to Solstheim. The journey was long and the waters were rough. One night he found himself exhausted, a symptom of the perilous journey. He ended up falling asleep and awoke to the ship crashing. Everyone on board died except for him and an old seer. The seer cursed the captain and made it so he can never fall asleep again. While Thormor is exhausted, he's unable to close his eyes and be at peace. Greywave says that if the player runs into the seer, maybe they could ask him to remove the curse for him. The old man is named Gaelier the Mumbling, and he lives in a dwelling here on Solstheim. If you're successful, he says he'll share with you a very valuable secret. This is yet another quest that's also tied into another. You may recognize the name, Gaelier the Mumbling, and even the tragic shipwreck. There's a quest called the Sad Seer that has the player wandering into Gaelier the Mumbling's dwelling. The old man explains the tragedy and mentions that he's the only member of his family left alive. As for the meat of the quest, he asks the Nerevarine to locate his friend, Oddfred Whitelip, in Kolbjorn Barrow. Doing so, Gaelier rewards you with a fortune-telling, which is actually a hint at Oblivion's plotline. However, once that's done, he becomes extra friendly with the player, making the current quest a lot easier. Chatting with the Nord, he comments on how the two of you still have unfinished business, and that there's something you want from him. Inquiring about Thormor's eternal wakefulness, Gaelier says that he never thought he'd have to lift the curse. However, after returning Oddfred, he decides to make things even and relieve Greywave of his torment. Returning to the captain, his demeanor has changed. He's happy yet exhausted. He knows the curse has been removed as he can barely stand upright. As for your reward, he asks that you meet him over in Thirsk Mead Hall. He needs to rest for a bit, and then he'll divulge his most valuable secret. Rushing over to the eastern part of the island and entering the Great Hall, Greywave can be found on the top level in one of the side rooms. His armor and clothes are gone, and you can see that he's made himself more comfortable. Chatting with Thormor once more, he thanks you again for your efforts and reveals his huge secret. Northeast of Thirsk, on a small island by the coast, is the Gildenhall Barrow. It's apparently loaded with riches. Thormor hands you the key to its door and bids you farewell. Following your newly marked map, it doesn't take very long before you arrive at the Barrow's entrance. Technically, you don't even need the key to enter if you have a lockpicker spell that can handle a level 100 lock. However, you knock a quest off your journal and reap the rewards. Inside the barrow, the floors are lined with mounds of gold. This was honestly the most gold I've ever seen in one area. Piles and piles of 100 counts of coins placed all around. It totals up to more than 10,000 septums. There were also weapons, a glass frost sword and an ebony longsword. There were 8 bottles of exclusive restore health potions, several gems and amulets, a glass helmet, and an ebony cuirass. There was most definitely something for everyone in here. Honestly, I'd recommend doing this quest as early as possible, as the riches and loot can make a world of difference for your playthrough. Other than the bank vault that you gain access to, there isn't much more to this quest. I found it neat that it ties into the Sad Seer, and as pointed out by the UESP, said quest sort of acts as a prerequisite to this one. The story of Gaelier and Thormor gets wrapped up. The tragic shipwreck that ruined Gaelier's life, which includes the loss of his family. It also had an impact on Thormor. He was riddled with guilt and cursed with this so-called eternal wakefulness for a total of 6 months. In the end, both men are able to find peace and have moved on. Greywave lives out the rest of his days at Thirsk Mead Hall, while Gaelier stays in his dwelling and receives fortunes from Oddfred. Unfortunately, the wreck of Thormor's ship is nowhere to be found. Let's hear the tale of 3 side quests featured in the Elder Scrolls III Morrowind's Bloodmoon expansion. These quests tell the stories of betrayal, sorrow, and triumph. The 3 missions are called Ingmar in a Bind, Betrayal at Brodir Grove, and A Wife's Retribution. First, I'll go over each quest, and then at the very end, I'll give some of my thoughts on them. As per usual, the facts and information are brought to you by the game itself and the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages. The adventure begins with Ingmar in a bind. For this one, the player may come across a young Nord named Ingmar while adventuring in the Isenfir Plains. Ingmar is standing outside of Valbrandir Barrow on the eastern side of Solstheim. Approaching him, he's non-hostile and actually has a favor to ask of the player. He opens by saying that he's glad that I'm not one of his Skull brothers. They'd be wondering why he's not inside of the barrow slaying the Draugr. When asked about the Valbrandir Draugr, Ingmar says that that's his test. Every young member of the Skull needs to test their valor by vanquishing a Draugr. He's apparently tried his hand already, but almost died fighting it. He can't return to the Skull until his task is completed. This is where the Nord gets an idea. He asks me to be a distraction while he focuses on striking it down. From here, I can either decline the offer, saying that it wouldn't be right if I helped him out, or I could accept it, ensuring that he doesn't get killed. Picking the latter, Ingmar becomes ecstatic. He tells me to lead on, but gives me a warning. I can't attack the Draugr, as sure forbid I end up being the one to defeat it. While my help is appreciated, for his own peace of mind, he needs to be the one who strikes it down. Sounding fair, together we ran inside of Valbrandir Barrow and faced down the ancient Nord. At first, I wanted to see what happens when I kill the undead, let alone at least land a hit. Well, it turns out that Ingmar gets really mad. He angrily says that he must now return to Skull Village, either a liar or a failure. He then asks to be left alone in order to ponder his fate. Obviously, it's not the outcome I was looking for, so let's revert back to the fight. Ingmar takes his sweet time striking down the Draugr. Meanwhile, I'm left taking the blows and ruining my armor. There is a way to hold aggro though while dodging the undead's hits, and it actually worked more than a couple of times. This whole process is fairly uneventful, and you just have to wait for Ingmar to do the work. Finally, the killing blow lands, and the young Nord is all set. It's safe to say that he feels pretty euphoric after that matchup. He's finally reached the Skull's benchmark of manhood, and wishes to spread the good news. Unfortunately, Ingmar doesn't have much on him, but as a reward, he says that I can loot the treasures from the barrow. Finally, he tells me that if I'm ever in Skull Village, I should go and pay him a visit. The barrow's treasures aren't bad. There's some gold, an amulet of shield, a Nordic claymore, a piece of armor, and 3 samples of Stallroom. However, the real prize comes from your visit to the Skull. Ingmar has a home on the northern side of the village. By speaking with him once more, he welcomed me into his home and offered me a proper reward for my efforts at Valbrandir Barrow. The Skull Warriors gifted him a belt of orc strength. As a kind gesture, he decides to hand it over to me. The belt fortifies strength for 5 to 20 points for 30 seconds. With that, thus ends the quest, Ingmar in a bind. The next quest for today is called Betrayal at Brodir Grove. Brodir Grove is located just northeast of Raven Rock. Upon your first approach, you'll notice 3 standing stones. They look out of place, or rather like they serve some sort of purpose. Right by the grove is a small cave. Its nameplate places it as Ulfgar the Unending's dwelling. Going on inside, you'll see a lone Nord wandering around. This is Ulfgar, and he's non-hostile. Speaking with him, he welcomes me to his dwelling and says that he hasn't had visitors in quite some time. He doesn't have much to offer, but he can share a sad tale. Ulfgar tells me his origin story. Him and 4 other warriors came to Solstheim. They were looking for something specific, and apparently almost found it. However, their brother-in-arms, Grimkel, betrayed the group. Grimkel turned Ulfgar's 3 other crewmates into those standing stones just outside. Ulfgar would have been the 4th, if not for him being able to defeat Grimkel in battle. However, the sorcerer's powers ended up taking some kind of toll on the Nord, as the skirmish was over 500 years ago. Ulfgar has been cursed with unending life. What's more, the quest that the Fellowship embarked on was to find the entrance to Sovngarde. He then goes on about Sovngarde, and how it's the afterlife every Nord warrior strives for. Infinite fighting, drinking, songs, and cheer. It was created by the god Shor in order to reward the valiant. Ulfgar has been all across Tamriel, searching for the portal to its halls, but he was never able to locate it. He says that he was even part of Ysgramor's 500 companions, and helped to drive the elves out of Skyrim. He thought this surely would have granted him access to Sovngarde, but alas, he's failed to reach the kingdom. As I departed from the conversation, Ulfgar says to keep him in mind. Maybe someday I'll come across vital information on how to reach Shor's halls. With no direction, this quest can either take you a while to complete, or no time at all. It just depends on if you know where to look. Well, as it would turn out, There's a book out there that might have the answers he's looking for. Thirsk's Mead Hall houses a Breton named Beredit Jastel. Jastel sells various texts and books that he's written. He has one on him titled Sovngarde, a re-examination. Purchasing it and cracking it open is enough to update the quest. However, for a brief summary, the book discusses the uncertainty of Sovngarde and how to gain entrance to it. Many believe that there's a portal of some kind, or a door that exists in the land. However, Jastel offers another theory. After interviewing a medium, Felga Fourfingers, he's since learned of Rolf the Large. Rolf was a warrior searching for the entrance to Sovngarde. After giving up, he returned to his village in Skyrim. On the way back, Rolf was attacked by a group of giants. He fought bravely, but ended up perishing in the battle. As his spirit started floating off into the sky, he could see the giants playing catch with his head. However, it was through this vision that he had finally discovered the key to Sovngarde. The entrance to Shor's halls was through death. Dying bravely in battle was the key to Sovngarde. With this new information, I returned to Ulfgar's dwelling. He asked if I had learned anything new, and started to doubt the existence of the Nordic afterlife. This is where I told him what I had just learnt, and I even gave him the book. Ulfgar was beyond excited. The answer was right in front of him all along. He needs to die in battle, but isn't quite sure how. That's no doubt a boast to his combat abilities. That's when he gets his eureka moment and asks me to help out. Together, we'll fight to the death, and hopefully I'll send his soul to Sovngarde. Accepting the offer, I readied myself and reinitiated our dialogue. Ulfgar warned me that he wasn't going to hold back, and that I'd probably be the one to die in the battle. You know what? He was almost right. Ulfgar was a tougher opponent than I had originally thought. He's placed at level 30, has 900 health points, and fights using an enchanted sword called Stormfang. Again, a little more challenging than expected. However, by maneuvering around the battlefield, lunging in and stepping back, I was able to send him to the afterlife. Stormfang is an enchanted two-handed longblade. It deals 1 to 25 points worth of shock damage per strike. From here, the rest of the dwelling can be looted. Further down the cave, there's a lone reekling. As the icy tunnels twist and turn, they bring you to a dead end that has 2 chests. Both are locked, but they contain some decent loot. While that may seem like the end for Ulfgar the Unending, that isn't quite the case. Exiting the dwelling and looking at Brodir Grove, you'll notice that there are now 4 stones. What's more, there's an apparition of Ulfgar that could be seen at the Grove Center. Speaking with him one last time, he expresses his gratitude. He's apparently found his brothers in arms on the other side. After recounting our battle, they've all decided to reward me for my valor. As Ulfgar fades off into Sovngarde, I'm free to reap the rewards. Each stone gives me a temporary buff. Nicholas's fortifies my personality by 10 points for 3 minutes. Erlander's buffs my speed. Ulfgar's my strength, and Hunror's my agility. All 4 buffs could be received at the same time. With that, thus ends the quest, Betrayal at Brodir Grove. The final quest for this video is a wife's retribution. For this one, the player may come across a cave called Kolfinna's Dwelling over in the Isenfir Plains. The dwelling can be found north of Fort Frostmoth, just off the western bank of the river. Upon going inside, you'll spot a Nord wandering around the cavern. Her name is Kolfinna, and by the look of things, it appears as though she lives in here. Speaking with her, she gets straight into it. She says that her and I aren't meeting under the best of circumstances. Just recently, her husband, Gustav Two-Teeth, was murdered in cold blood by Sigvarder the Strong. Apparently, the two got into it after an argument, and that's when her husband was slain. Kolfinna calls for Wergild, some good old-fashioned retribution. When a life is taken, it must be accounted for. Kolfinna doesn't want Sigvarder dead. Instead, she wants his family heirloom, Pine Tear. It means more to Sigvarder than his own life, so that's why Kolfinna wants it so badly. The widow asks for my help in extracting Wergild, and I agree to it. The Nord tells me that Sigvarder hunts near the altar of Thrond. She warns me though that he wields the powerful hammer, Ramacald. From her dwelling, the altar of Thrond is located north-northwest. Sigvarder could be found just south of it, right by the riverbank. Approaching him, he's non-hostile. Speaking with the hunter, he knows that Kolfinna is seeking Wergild. However, Pine Tear has been in his family for generations, and he refuses to give it up. Sigvarder claims that he did what he had to do, and that he had no choice. Raising his disposition to 75, he elaborates a little more on what went down. The two men drank too much and started to argue. Sigvarder saw Gustav reach for his blade, and that's when he beat him to the punch, striking him down before he could do anything. He's still in shock at what happened, but claims it to be self-defense. Therefore, there is no wergild to be had. Finally, raising his disposition to 100, Sigvarder gives in. He claims his story is the truth, but he's second-guessing if he made the right call or not. Maybe Gustav was reaching for his knife. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he really did murder his friend in cold blood. In a bout of sorrow and grief, Sigvarder hands me Pyntear. He tells me to give it to Golfinna, and hopes that it eases her pain and her need for wergild. This is of course the peaceful outcome. If you choose to take it by force, Sigvarder fights with Ramacald, a two-handed warhammer that deals 1 to 4 points of frost damage on touch and also paralyzes the opponent for 10 seconds. It's a decent weapon for those who are proficient in blunt weapons. Either way though, once Pyntear has been acquired, the player can return to Golfinna's dwelling. Upon speaking with the widow, she asks about Sigvarder and if I had extracted wergild. Handing her Pyntear, she becomes ecstatic. She's finally been compensated for her husband's murder. As a reward, she allows me full access to her dwelling. I can use her bed whenever I'd like, and she hands me the key to her husband's chest, remarking that I could take everything that's inside. The chest is filled with bolts, a crossbow, a steel flame blade, sets of armor, as well as some potions. With that, thus ends the quest, A Wife's Retribution. Now, let's talk a little bit about these quests. Ingmar in a Bind is pretty flat. There isn't a lot to discuss there. It's a young man who's clearly not skilled enough to meet the Skull's combat standards, so he gets the help of a random adventurer. Together, using the Nerevarine as a meat shield, Ingmar cheap shots his way into the Skull Hall of Fame. Luckily for him, he now never has to leave his home at the Skull Village, so he'll never get to show off his amazing combat skills. It's a pretty short quest, probably the shortest one out of all three. The big rewards are likely the 2 samples of Stalrim, as well as the Enchanted Belt. Really, the biggest point of interest, as pointed out by the UESP, is soul trapping the Valbrander Draugr. Since it's considered a unique NPC, the value and charge are way better than the average Draugr. It's possible to cast Soul Trap before Ingmar kills it, giving you the Soul Gem. While I haven't tested this out during the actual quest, I wonder if you could cast some sort of long-form Soul Trap spell on the Draugr before the quest has even begun. Then you start Ingmar in a Bind, have the Nord defeat it, and receive the Valbrander Draugr Soul. The next quest up for discussion is Betrayal at Brodir Grove. This one has a little more to it than Ingmar in a Bind. For starters, there's no mention of Grimkel or what happened to his soul. While he did betray his brothers in arms, he died fighting Ulfgar and while looking for Sovngarde. However, Ulfgar doesn't mention seeing him in Sovngarde, so it would seem that his spirit ended up in some other realm, probably just Aetherius. Ulfgar claims to have been a part of Ysgramor's conquest. The Nord says he fought in the Return and drove the elves out of Skyrim. However, he also says he was made immortal over 500 years ago. While we technically don't know the upper end of that number, Ysgramor's conquest was thousands of years ago. At most, it seems like Ulfgar was alive during the late Second Era. Could his claim to being one of the 500 companions be true, and his answer was just a little vague? Or could it be false? Was it retconned? Was he lying? Or perhaps the conquest just wasn't as fleshed out during that development of Morrowind. Next, I'm surprised that the concept of Sovngarde wasn't as widely known during this point in time. Playing through Skyrim, every Nord knows that if you die valiantly in battle, you get sent to Sovngarde. However, just 200 years prior, the idea of Shor's Halls was nothing more than a myth, a dream being chased by warriors who wanted more. It's neat to think that through the help of Beredit Jastel and the Nerevarine, Nordic culture has been changed forever. Because of the character's actions during Bloodmoon, Nords everywhere now know how to reach their version of Valhalla. Finally, as mentioned by the UESP, you can actually find Ulfgar in Sovngarde during Skyrim's main questline. Definitely a neat little detail. The final quest for today was A Wife's Retribution. This quest introduced the player to the idea of wergild. I'd remembered hearing of wergild at least once before, but couldn't quite put my finger on where. However, after a quick search, I saw that it was mentioned by Matthew Bellamont in one of his dead drops. For Havelstein Whoreblood, Bellamont says that the victim's sister has forgone wergild, and instead chose the Black Sacrament. Obviously, that was a lie, but that is the next documented mention of wergild. Unfortunately, A Wife's Retribution is also pretty quick and to the point. Golfinna asks you to get revenge for her husband's murder. Finding Sigvarder, you can either defeat him in combat, receiving Pyntear and the Enchanted Hammer, Ramacald, or you can raise his disposition, learn the truth, and still get the quest item. Then finally, to me, in terms of the reward, it's mostly just a free, safe place to camp out in the wilderness while you're exploring. These are the last 2 side quests that I've yet to cover for this DLC, and then I'm finally done with it. The missions in question are A Woman Scorned and Tymvaul in the Well. One of these deals with infidelity, betrayal, and murder. I'm sure you can guess which one that is, and the other deals with temptation and redemption. I'll play through both quests first, then go over my thoughts at the end of the video. As per usual, the facts and information provided are brought to you by the game itself and the unofficial Elder Scrolls pages. The first quest for today is A Woman Scorned. This one begins with the player wandering around the Brodir Grove area. Just north of Raven Rock, you'll come across a cave called Kilver's Dwelling. By going on inside, you'll happen across a Nord who seemingly made this icy den her home. This is Kilver, and she's got quite the task for the player. Kilver recognizes that my character isn't from these lands. She thinks that can be used to her advantage. She also knows that I've done some fighting in my time, citing that I'm no stranger to death. Kilver decides to make me an offer regarding dark business. Apparently, her husband, Brodir, is having an affair with someone named Erna the Quiet. Kilver loves her husband dearly, and still wishes to be with him. However, she wants Erna out of the picture for good. In exchange for compensation, the Nord asks me to assassinate Erna the Quiet. Agreeing to the deal, Kilver gives me the lowdown. Erna is a member of the Skull, and has a house there. I'm to perform the deed, grab her ring as proof, and then return to Kilver. Sounding easy enough, I traveled to the village and began casing the houses. Soon, I landed on Erna's and entered the building. Unfortunately, no one was home. The place was void of life. Looking around for any clues as to where she could have gone, I ended up coming across a note on the table. It was from Erna, and it was addressed to Brodir. It read, "Dearest Brodir, I decided to take a walk on the banks of the Isilde. The river is so beautiful this time of year, don't you think? Come find me, and we shall talk about our future and freedom from your shrew of a wife. Your love, Erna." Using this clue, I made my way out of the village and descended the hill. On the eastern bank, north of Lake Fjelding and southwest of Skull Village, I spotted 2 Nords by the river. One was clad in traditional Nordic armor, and the other was in simple fur clothing. No doubt, Erna and Brodir. The pair doesn't have much to say, other than how happy they are with one another. Brodir says that him and Erna have a love that his wife will never understand. Well, a deal's a deal, so it's time to take that love away. 2 good strikes with my Daedric Daikatana, and Erna was now forever quiet. On her person, she had a few items, but the one that mattered the most was the ring. Brodir insisted on chasing me through the Felsad coast, saying that I killed the only woman he's ever loved. That probably won't bode very well with the missus, but regardless, I was able to escape the area, flee his aggro, and recall over to Kilver. Speaking with her, she asked if our dark business was completed. I told her yes, it was. Her husband's mistress is now dead. Kilver was ecstatic. She exclaimed that Brodir was now all hers. She's convinced that he'll remember his love for her and that they'll once again be a happy couple. As a reward, Kilver pays me 1,000 gold. Something tells me that Brodir is never coming back, but hey, at least I've got some decent pocket change. With that, thus ends the quest, A Woman Scorned. The final quest for this video is Tymvaul in the Well. This mission has a few different outcomes. It begins with the player wandering around Skull Village. By entering Lasner's house on the northern side of town, you'll find the old Nord pacing around, worrying about his son. Speaking with him, he at first mistakes me for Tymvaul. After realizing I'm not his child, he asks for forgiveness and mentions that he's in agony. Inquiring about it, Lasner reveals what happened to Tymvaul. Apparently, his son went to go fetch water from the nearby well and fell in. Most of the other Skull believe him to be dead, but Lasner believes otherwise. The well leads to the Rimhall ice caves, and the old Nord thinks his son is held up in there. He himself can't search for Tymvaul due to his age, but he wonders if I might have a look around. Agreeing to help Lasner, he hands me the key to the well. He's apparently kept it locked up so that no one else suffers the same fate. Exiting the home and running out back, the well is indeed secured by a level 100 lock and leads straight to Rimhall. Climbing down, I'm brought into an underwater cave. Swimming through the tunnels, I soon emerged into the corridors of Rimhall. Here, most of the enemies I faced were skeletons. They were sporadically placed around the cavern, often in groups of 2 or more. Luckily, they weren't that difficult to deal with, and what's more, I quickly ran into Tymvaul. The Nord was alive and well. He donned an enchanted robe and made mention of the forces of darkness, as well as calling himself Tymvaul the Dark. Speaking with him, the true story began to unravel. He called me out as an intruder, claimed the halls of Rimhall as his domain, and also mentioned that the Mantle of Woe is all his. Unsure of what he meant, I inquired more about this mysterious robe. Tymvaul had apparently read stories and books on this magical item. He couldn't believe that a powerful artifact such as this was stashed below Skull Village. Wanting to see it for himself, he jumped down the well, defeated Rimhall's threats, and reaped its rewards. His end goal is to raise an army of the dead, likely starting with all of the nearby skeletons. From here, there are 5 different dialogue prompts that I can choose from. Admittedly though, 4 of them lead to the same outcome. Starting with the first one, calling him insane and saying that all evil should die, Tymvaul doesn't take this statement too kindly. He calls me a self-righteous fool, says that good doesn't truly exist, and then threatens to show me the true meaning of power. From here, a fight breaks out. Tymvaul is level 30, has 300 health, and knows how to cast Force Bolt, Flay Spirit, and summon Skeletal Minion. Luckily, for my case, his casts are fairly predictable, and the fight didn't last very long. All he has on his person is the Mantle of Woe, but boy oh boy is it a crazy robe. For starters, it's valued at 10,000 gold, so non-mages can certainly profit from it. However, if you're a spellcaster, like my character kind of sort of is, it has some really nice enchantments. Fortify Conjuration for 50 points, and Fortify Maximum Magicka by 5 times your intelligence points. Spells that used to sap up almost all of my magicka now just take down a sliver of my bar. With this robe, I won't need to pop as many mana potions or rest as frequently. However, there are of course some downsides in the form of curses. For starters, it drains the wearer's personality for 100 points. The wearer has a weakness to normal weapons by 20 points, and they also take 20 points of sun damage. It's safe to say that there's a time and a place to wear the Mantle of Woe. Regardless, once Tymvaul has been dealt with, it's now time to report back to Lassner. When an old man's anguish is brought up, there are 2 dialogue prompts to choose from. The first is to tell the truth. You can let Lassner know that his son turned to the dark side, attacked you in the tunnels, and that you acted in self-defense. The second is to lie, and just say that you found Tymvaul's body, gave him a proper burial, and that's about it. Choosing the former first, Lassner doesn't take the news very well. He doesn't understand how I could take Tymvaul's life when my mission was to simply rescue him. The Nord becomes incredibly angry and says that I'll pay for my actions. This is where the conversation ends and a fight breaks out. Lassner is only level 6, has 40 health, and fights with his fists. It's safe to say that he's unable to inflict much damage. With his death, the quest is officially at an end, and there's no happy ending for the Nordic family. Now, reverting back to the start of the conversation and lying to Lassner about his son's fate, things go a little differently. Lassner is a lot calmer and sort of at peace. It's as he feared though. His only family left in the world is gone. He feels that soon he'll wither and pass on, hopefully rejoining his wife and son in the afterlife. He doesn't have much to offer, but he rewards me with 2 snowbear pelts. Lassner directs me to Brynjolfur at Thirsk and mentions that he can make some unique armors with the furs. Now, reverting back to the Tymvaul encounter, as I mentioned before, 4 of these dialogue prompts lead to the aforementioned outcome. By telling Tymvaul that such power must never be wielded by one so feeble and that the mantle is mine, he of course takes it as a challenge. He calls for a dark duel, and from there, the quest unfolds like how it did before. By asking to join Tymvaul and wanting to work together on bringing death to Solstheim, he says that such power cannot be shared. He alone is the master of the dead, and he'll add my corpse to his undead ranks. By offering to leave Tymvaul alone and attempting to exit Rimhall peacefully, the Nord says that we were destined to meet. He's raising an army of the dead, and he needs as many fresh corpses as he could find. These 4 prompts lead to Tymvaul attacking the player and ultimately result in his death. The only prompt that leads to a different outcome is the second one. By telling the Nord that his father loves him and wants him to be happy, Tymvaul comes to his senses. He's shocked to hear that his father still holds him dear in his heart. He only wanted to study magic and be free of the laws of the skull. Necromancy was the easiest school to learn, but with it comes so much unchecked power. Tymvaul removes the robe and hands it over to me. He vows to study true magic somewhere else in the world and will one day return to see his father. He wants to make Lassner proud, and as a last message, he says that he loves him. Returning to Lassner and conveying Tymvaul's thoughts, the grizzled old Nord couldn't be happier. He's glad to hear that his son is alive, and he knows that he'll return to the village someday. This time, as a reward, Lassner hands me 5 snow bear pelts, thanks me for my effort, and sends me on my way. Before leaving, as pointed out by the UESP, it seems as though Tymvaul's experiments aren't very secretive. He has skulls, human flesh, ghoul and daedric hearts, as well as a bunch of books on summoning Daedra and preparing corpses. At least he's now chosen a better path for himself. Or we can only hope. With that, thus ends the quest, Tymvaul and the Well, and that wraps up all of the side quests featured in Morrowind's Bloodmoon expansion. Now, let's talk a little bit about these 2 quests. A Woman Scorned was pretty interesting, but unfortunately, there isn't much lore behind it. It tells the tale of a jealous wife and an unfaithful husband. Kjolver knows of Brandir's affair. Instead of leaving and starting anew, she goes for the more outlandish approach. She hires a total stranger to murder her husband's mistress, and you know what? If there's gold involved, I'm in. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have Brandir, the Nord who says he's no longer in love with his wife. He found a new love, Urn of the Quiet, and claims it to be the best relationship he's ever had. Obviously, I'm not here to give counseling on fictional marriages, but it seems like their relationship is a real mess. Through dialogue and texts, you can see that Kjolver is obsessive over Brandir, calling him her whole world. Clearly, Brandir prefers his woman quieter and less animated. He chose to explore a bond with Erna, a woman whose nickname literally has quiet in it. Now, at the end of the day, Erna's dead. Will Brandir actually return to Kjolver? I doubt it. In fact, the game has the player covered if they accidentally or purposefully kill him. The journal indicates that the player won't make mention of Brandir's death. Therefore, Kjolver stays waiting in that dwelling for the rest of her days. Even if Brandir is spared, he spends the rest of his days wandering the riverbank, waiting to cross paths with the player. Again, it's an interesting quest, but it's rather short and doesn't offer much in the way of lore. Needless to say, both of the parties involved are pretty bad. The next quest, Tymvaul and the Well, is a little different though. For starters, as soon as Lassner said that his son fell in the well, I knew something was off. A grown Nord probably wouldn't just fall inside a 3x3 tunnel. What's more, it's interesting that the Skull wouldn't even try to rescue one of their own. If Tymvaul really did die in the village's main water supply, it's probably a good idea to remove his body. If there's any doubt that he's dead, it's only right to send a team after him. Plus, Lassner spoke of a separate entrance to Rimhall, so it's not like everyone has to dive into the well. However, maybe the Skull knew of Tymvaul's extracurricular activities, and thought it best to just let him die down there. I'll touch on it more in a bit, but as I've said, the young Nord had some strange ingredients in his home. Ingredients which surely would be difficult to come by all the way out here. In any case, it's probably Tymvaul's current state and mindset that's more intriguing. Finding the Nord, his mind is twisted and warped. He's overcome by dark magic. At first, I assumed that the Mantle of Woe did this to him. It does warp the wearer's personality and grants them crazy amounts of power. Surely, Lassner would have noticed something was off about his son before he fell into the dungeon, right? But Lassner isn't the sharpest tool in the shed, and the proof might be in the pudding. Tymvaul had all sorts of necromancy and conjuration books laying around. He had several questionable ingredients out in the open, including a basket full of human skulls. So it seems as though he was quietly building his confidence as a necromancer until it was finally time to act. After locating the Mantle of Woe, he started to raise an army of the dead. Now, as for the mantle itself, not much is known about it. However, according to the UESP, it seems to be a big deal within the necromancer community. In the Cave of Skeeg, just west of Skull Village, there are 3 necromancers. One of them is plated as a rogue necromancer. After defeating him, you gain access to his journal. It reads, "Weaklings and cowards. I care not what they think of me or my pursuit of the dark arts. Who are they to dictate the form of magicka I practice? Vardenfell holds generations of dead just ripe for the picking, and yet they hoard this resource as if it were sacred. Such nonsense. I've been less successful here on Solstheim than I would have hoped. The cursed magic ice protects many of the corpses, and even I have trouble controlling the savage draugrs. Even so, my work continues, and the apprentices are growing more powerful every day. My latest research has revealed the location of the Mantle of Woe. It lies within the Rimhall Ice Cave. Soon, I will claim its dark power as my own. While it only really leaves me with more questions, one thing is for certain. The Mantle of Woe is a bigger deal than it's made out to be. Maybe one day we'll see it again in a future Elder Scrolls game, and there its lore will be further explained. Thank you everyone for watching. Members, I really appreciate all of your support. If you enjoyed the video, consider leaving a like as well as subscribing. Until next time, keep on adventuring.